Mark had always believed that silence had a taste. In New York, it tasted of metallic dust and overheated subways. Here, in Derry, Maine, the silence tasted of old fur, mildew, and something else, something cloyingly sweet that reminded him of cotton candy left out in the rain. The house at 14 Blackwood Lane hadn't been inhabited for decades. It sat there like a rotting tooth in the jaw of the forest. When Mark first stepped inside, the floorboards groaned under his weight. Not just the sound of wood, but a protest. It felt as if the house was yawning after a long, predatory sleep. "Perfect," he whispered, but his voice sounded thin and alien in the empty corridor. On the second day, Mrs. Eldridge appeared. She lived in the only other house on the road, a structure that looked as if it were held together by nothing but sheer willpower and layers of lead paint. She didn't bring a pie or warm soup. She brought a cardboard box. "Found it in the cellar," she said, avoiding his eyes. Her hands, mottled with liver spots, trembled slightly. "It belonged to Mr. Henderson. The previous, well, he didn't take it with him." Mark looked into the box. It was an old baby monitor from the mid-'80s. The plastic had yellowed to the color of a heavy smoker's teeth, and the long antenna was slightly kinked. "I don't need this, Mrs. Eldridge. I don't have kids." "Take it," she interrupted. And this time she looked at him. Her eyes were like two burnt-out coals. "It's better off here than at my place. Sometimes it's good to hear what's happening in the other rooms. Don't you think?" She left before he could refuse. Mark left the box on the kitchen table. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the linoleum, shadows that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for the plastic device. He felt a sudden, irrational shiver. That night, driven by a strange, bored curiosity, Mark plugged the receiver in his bedroom. He took the transmitter downstairs and left it in the empty parlor. Just a test. Pshh. The device hissed. Static. White noise, the sound of emptiness. Mark lay in bed, eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic hiss. It was soothing in a hypnotic way, until the clock on his phone hit 3:14 a.m. Pshh, Mark. Pshh. His eyes snapped open. The room was bathed in ink-black darkness. The baby monitor on his nightstand glowed with a small, malevolent red light. "Daddy," a child's voice whispered through the static. "Daddy, Mr. Henderson is in the closet again, and he smells like dirt." Mark felt his stomach drop. He had no children. He was alone in a house miles from the nearest town. But from the transmitter downstairs, in the pitch-black parlor, came a clear, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the sound of someone knocking. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The sound of the dragging stopped, but the static remained, a jagged electrical hum that felt like a needle stitching its way through Mark's brain. He lay frozen, his breath hitching in his chest. In the darkness of his bedroom, the red LED of the baby monitor looked like a predator's eye. He told himself it was a cross signal, some neighbor's kid, miles away. But the voice hadn't sounded like it was coming from miles away. It sounded like it was coming from right under his bed. The next morning, the Maine sun was deceptive. It was bright and sharp, turning the autumn leaves into shards of gold, but it provided no warmth. Mark spent 3 hours searching the parlor. He moved the sofa, an ugly, floral thing that smelled of mothballs, and checked the floorboards. Nothing, no signs of anything being dragged. But then he saw it. of the parlor, behind a heavy mahogany bookshelf he hadn't bothered to move yet. The wallpaper was peeling. It was old-fashioned paper, a sickly yellow pattern of intertwined vines that looked like strangling hands. Behind the shelf, the paper wasn't just peeling, it was shredded. Mark grunted as he heaved the bookshelf aside. The wood groaned, a sound that echoed too loudly in the silent house. Behind it, a small wooden door, no more than 3 feet high, was built into the wall. A cold closet, or perhaps an old crawlspace access. It was locked with a rusted iron bolt. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Thump, 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 like a trapped bird. "Just a house," he whispered. "It's just an old, drafty house in a town that time forgot." He reached for the bolt. It was cold, unnaturally cold, as if the metal had been sitting in a freezer. When he touched it, a jolt of static electricity snapped between his finger and the iron, and for a fleeting second, he didn't see the parlor. He saw a flash of a dark room, a child crying in the corner, and a tall man standing over him, holding a heavy, rusted spade. Mark recoiled, gasping. He stumbled back, his heel catching on the rug. Psh! The baby monitor, which he had left on the kitchen counter, crackled to life. "He sees you, Mark," the child's voice whispered. It was wet, as if the speaker had a throat full of phlegm. "He likes the way you smell, like fear, like New York, like someone who thinks he can run away from his own shadow." Mark didn't go to the kitchen. He didn't turn it off. Instead, he grabbed his car keys and drove. He drove until he reached the town square, a cluster of brick buildings that looked like they hadn't changed since the Eisenhower administration. He found himself at the local library, a place that smelled of vanilla and decaying paper. The librarian, a woman named Martha, with glasses thick enough to be bulletproof, looked up as he approached. "The Henderson place?" she asked, before he even finished his question. Word traveled fast in Derry. People don't usually ask about that house unless they're looking for trouble or a way out of it. "What happened there, Martha?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. She sighed, a long, weary sound. "Cyrus Henderson. He was a deacon at the church, a pillar of the community, they called him. Until the winter of '84, his grandson came to stay with him, a sweet boy, Toby. One night the boy just vanished. Cyrus claimed he ran off into the woods. The police searched for weeks. They found nothing, but Cyrus was never the same. He started talking to things that weren't there. He told the neighbors he bought a baby monitor so he could keep an ear on the boy's soul." Mark felt a bead of cold sweat slide down his spine. "Cyrus died in that house," Martha continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Heart attack. When they found him, he was clutching that baby monitor so tight they had to break his fingers to get it out of his hands. And the strange thing, the device wasn't even plugged in. But the officers, they swore they could hear a child screaming through the speaker." Mark didn't drive home immediately. He sat in his car outside the library, the engine idling, watching the gray Maine sky turn a bruised purple. He thought about leaving, just driving south until the air didn't smell like old pine and secrets. But the house had his deposit, his furniture, and, more importantly, it had a grip on his mind. It was the king's trap, the irrational need to know why the floorboards screamed. When he finally returned to 14 Blackwood Lane, the house looked different. It looked hungry. He walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed the baby monitor, and threw it into the heavy-duty plastic trash bin outside. He slammed the lid and put a heavy stone on top of it. "Enough," he muttered. But as he walked back to the porch, he heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching. It wasn't coming from the trash bin. It was coming from the walls of the house itself. Scritch, 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 like long fingernails tracing the path of the wiring. Mark retreated to his bedroom, locking the door as if a wooden bolt could stop a sound. He turned on every light in the room. He grabbed a book, trying to drown out the silence, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. Then, the air in the room chilled. He could see his own breath forming a mist in front of his face, and there, on the nightstand, where it had been that morning, sat the baby monitor. It was covered in wet coffee grounds and eggshells from the trash. It was filthy, smelling of rot, but the little red light was glowing brighter than ever. "Pshh! I told you, Mark." The child's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a wet, raspy giggle. "You can't throw away a memory. My grandpa Cyrus tried. He tried to bury me in the walls, but the wires, they carried my voice anyway." Mark's heart felt like it was going to burst through his ribs. "What do you want?" he screamed at the plastic box. The static cleared completely. For the first time, there was no white noise. The silence on the other end was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. "I want to tell you about the girl in Brooklyn, Mark," the voice said. It was different now, deeper, mocking. "The one you didn't call back. The one who cried for 3 days because you were too cowardly to tell her it was over. You like to run, don't you? You ran from her. You ran from your job. You ran to Maine. No tu kanyama kadeda biagash." Mark froze. How could a ghost in a rural Maine house know about a girl in New York? This wasn't just a haunting. It was a breakdown. The house wasn't just recording the past. It was broadcasting his own guilt. Suddenly, the transmitter downstairs, the one he had left in the parlor, picked up a new sound. Heavy, dragging footsteps. Step. Drag. Step. Drag. They were coming from the parlor, moving toward the stairs. Mark grabbed a heavy brass lamp, the only weapon he had. He stood by the door, his knuckles white, his breath coming in jagged gasps. Step. Drag. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They stopped right outside his bedroom door. The baby monitor hissed one last time before the battery died, even though it was plugged in. Grandpa's home, Mark, and he brought the spade. A slow, rhythmic knocking began on his bedroom door. Knock, knock, knock. But the knocking didn't come from the height of a man's hand. It came from the very bottom of the door, as if someone or something was knocking while lying flat on the floor. Mark looked down at the gap between the door and the floorboards. A dark, viscous liquid began to seep through. It looked like old oil, or perhaps decomposed blood. "Go away!" Mark shrieked, swinging the lamp at the door. The knocking stopped. A voice, low and rusted like a saw blade cutting through bone, rose from the floorboards. "Open up, Sonny. I just want to see if you're as soft on the inside as the last one." The door handle began to turn, slowly, excruciatingly. Mark backed away toward the window, but as he looked at the glass, he didn't see his own reflection. He saw a tall, gaunt man in a tattered deacon's suit standing directly behind him in the reflection, though the space behind Mark was empty. The man in the mirror raised a finger to his lips. Shh, the reflection whispered.